Amen. Okay, Psalm 50 is where we're going to start this morning. Let me just ask you, when you think about these Psalms of disorientation, these Psalms of lament as we've looked at, a couple of things that we've pointed out is that these are as uncomfortable, I think, maybe as these make us. These are faithful ways to deal with God. These are, and I hope that's one thing you've taken from this section of this quarter, is that it's okay to be upset. It's okay to be frustrated, even with God. It's okay to voice those things because we see a lot of it. And there's a formula or a structure. We've looked at that. There's this idea of here's my problem, God. Here's what I expect you to do about it. And then it goes through another step or two, and then it ends up with this kind of what I call the deep breath moment, where the psalmist just goes, "But God, you're in charge, and I'm going to try and hang on to that. I'm going to try and keep that focus." These two today are going to be different. Let me ask you, in your opinion, these lament psalms or these disorientation psalms, what have you heard these psalmists say? I mean, not specifically, but what's the vibe you get from these psalms? Why? A lot of why? Why is this happening?
For the most part, I'm in distress, but you're still in charge.
I'm in distress, you're still in charge. What else? Let me go back to Dana's comment. It is always, I'm in distress. Here's my problem. Here's what I need you to do, God. Here's the situation I'm dealing with. Sometimes it is the psalmist saying, I haven't done anything to deserve this, God. You've put me in this situation, or you've allowed this situation to happen to me, and I've done nothing wrong. What is the problem? David had that moment sometimes. David had the moments where he knew he'd done something wrong, but there were times where he's like, my enemies pursue me. I've tried to be the best person I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to be your king, yet this still happens. Sometimes we read, we touched on 2 weeks ago and didn't really get there, but Psalm 137, by the rivers of Babylon, the people are saying, here we are, we're stuck in captivity. We don't know how to get out of this. Now, we know, and I think a lot of them knew, there was a reason they were in captivity. But even for the faithful Jew, who they were being told, how can we sing the songs of our King in a strange land? These were the faithful Jews who were like, we're stuck here too. So there is this idea of, I didn't do anything to deserve this, and it's almost a monologue, if you will. It's here's what the situation is, here's what I need, here's how I want you to fix it, God. Psalm 50 and Psalm 81 are the two we're going to look at this morning. Take a very different approach. What these two psalms will do is now we get to hear what God has to say. These two psalms, we get to hear God's voice and God's opinion about things. These two psalms, or Psalm 50 in particular, Psalm 81 is a little different, but Psalm 50 in particular presents things in a very different way. It's very much a courtroom type setting. It's God almost, can you think of another time where God says, okay, it's time for me to speak? Job. This is almost very Job-esque. This is a whole psalm where it's almost like God says, okay, I've heard your laments. I've heard your disorientation. Now it's time for you to hear from me. It's time for me to state my case to you. Psalm 42 through 49 are Psalms of Korah. And we talked about this from the very beginning. The Psalms aren't always, they're not grouped chronologically. They're not grouped by story. They are sometimes grouped in this situation by author or by kind of thematically. We're going to finish, we would finish, if we were just going straight through at 49, you'd finish the Psalms of Korah. And now we shift to some Psalms of Asaph. There's 12 in a row of Asaph, or there's 12, not in a row, there's 12 total Psalms of Asaph. Asaph was the name of the leader of the musicians in Israel. And some scholars say that these Psalms of Asaph weren't necessarily the same guy writing them all, like kind of like Pharaoh or Herod was a title that it's not Herod Johnson or Pharaoh Jones, or that's their title. That's what they're called. And some scholars say that maybe Asaph became just the name of the leader of the musicians. But regardless, that's just Trivial Pursuit stuff there. Asaph is accredited as the author of this psalm. And this psalm is broken up into 3 sections. Verses 1 through 6 in this psalm shows God giving some detail. It's almost like God calls the court to order. He says, all right, gather around here. You'll notice most translations start or in like verse 7. God has by verse 7, God has said, okay, here's come together and get ready to know what I have to say. Then verse 7 in my translation starts with listen. And it's God saying, okay, now's the time for you to listen to me. Now's the time for you to hear this. So verses 1 through 6 is kind of the convening of the trial. 7 through 15, God asserts his sovereignty. And God says, okay, you listen to me because I'm God and you're not, which is obviously valid. And then 16 through 23 is really where I want us to kind of focus this morning, unfortunately, because these are God's words for the wicked. Now, let's look through this a little bit, but then, like I said, we'll focus on that section in particular. Look at verses 1 through 6. Would someone please read out loud verses 1 through 6 for me, please? Okay, what sort of language stands out there? I mean, what things jump out to you in that section? God is the judge. What else do you see? If this was your first exposure to God, these first 6 verses, what are you going to think about God? Power. What else?
It's like a courtroom of a judge, all rise.
Yeah.
He's an authority.
He's an authority. He's all powerful. And notice there's some grandiose type terminology here. From the rising of the sun to its setting, from Zion, the perfection of its beauty, God appears in radiant. There's no, okay, listen, now God's in charge here, and he really wants to talk to you guys. He's just like, look who I am. I'm the one saying, come in here and listen. So there's a demand for attention in all this. There is God saying, you're my people, but as you guys said, I'm the judge here. I'm the one in charge here. So it's time for you guys to listen to what I have to say. Verses 7 through 15. Somebody read that for me, please. Okay, when you hear that, tell me what do you hear? What do you hear from God there? Yeah, there's almost there's some things we need to fix here. What else?
He's talking to his people and he's saying, yes, I want you to go through these practices, but at the end of the day, you are my people. Where's your heart?
Yeah. Think about, I was trying to find a couple of examples. Think about in the prophets. You see it some in Amos. You see it in Micah, I believe. What does God say about their new moons and their festivals in the prophets? I'm sick of it. I'm sick of your festivals and your feasts and all this stuff. Why? Why does God get, okay, not where we are now, but why does God get to that point by the time we're in the later prophets? Yeah. It's become simply a practice that they do. Here, God says in verse 8, I don't rebuke you for your sacrifices or for your burnt offerings, which are continually before me. It's almost like he's saying, you're doing it. I'm not on you for that. But, and that's where you go,
The other gods at the time are receiving sacrifices in order to do stuff with people, right?
yeah.
Give a sacrifice for a good harvest. And God's coming out and saying, I'm not hungry. I don't need you to do these because you're doing it already. I'm doing it because I'm your God, not because you paid me to do this for you.
Yeah, it's almost like God saying, I'm doing this, I'm doing what I do for you because I'm God. I'm your God, you're my people. And then he says, and I don't really need you. If I'm hungry, am I going to tell you? No, I'm God. I'm not going to come asking you people, please love me, please do. He says, listen, here's who I am. And here's what's expected of you by me because of who I am. Now, when you look at that in, not necessarily contrast, but in connection with the Psalms of Orientation, where it's just, God's great, everything's happy, and I'm so great, I'm so glad to be your God, and I'm yours, and all. This is God's answer, or not necessarily answer, but this is almost the maybe it is a contrast to those, where God says, yeah, you're doing all that stuff, and you're worshiping me and all this, but where's your heart? He's talking about their relationship, that they're doing the stuff, but there's no relationship there. John said there's no heart there.
You honor me with your lips, but your heart is far from me.
Right. Now, and that's what I was going to say, that this is one of those things that didn't go away. Luckily, it's gone away completely now, right?
They're worshiping the worship.
What's that?
They're worshiping the worship.
They're worshiping the worship. That's a good phrase. Everybody forget that, because I'm going to use that sometime, and you're going to think that was really smart of me. That's exactly what it is. It is the acts of worship have become the thing. And that's scary. Because look at the next few verses. Verse 16, but God says to the wicked. Now, you're going to read that. You're going to open up your Bible, and somebody's going to say, well, I want you to turn to Psalm 50, verse 16. But God says to the wicked, who are you thinking of? Bad people. The wicked, the evil sinners, those people. What right do you have to recite my statutes and to take my covenant on your lips? He's talking to his people. He's talking to specifically it seems here, he's talking to the leaders of the people. He's saying, what, and that's what's very humbling, that's not the right word, frightening, I guess, maybe about this. God says, what right do you have to say you're my people? Yikes. You hate instruction and fling my words behind you. When you see a thief, you make friends with him, and you associate with adulterers. You unleash your mouth for evil, and harness your tongue for deceit. You sit maligning your brother, slandering your mother's son. You have done these things, and I kept silent. You thought I was just like you. But I will rebuke you and lay out the case before you. Understand this, you who forget God, or I will tear you apart. And there will be no one to rescue you. Whoever sacrifices a thank offering honors me, and whoever offers his conduct, I will show him the salvation of God. This has gone in this psalm from, I'm God, I'm great, we've got a problem here, to you better be listening to what I'm saying. Now, when we think of this idea of the Psalms of orientation or disorientation, which, as Adam started us on these, these are lament psalms. How is this a lament psalm? Who's lamenting? This is God saying, you need to hear my perspective of things once in a while. You ever think about that? I mean, do we ever, as 21st century Christians today, do we ever think about God's perspective? How does God feel about our relationship? How does God feel about our conduct? How does God feel about our worship? We live in a religious culture where worship is up to us. Whatever you want to do, whatever you think is good for worship, if that's your talent, that's your skill, God's so thrilled with it. We ever think about, is that really what God says? What God's saying here in this text is, you're doing the right things, but you have no heart in them. So, I mean, we know how God feels about doing the wrong things. So when we, I mean, I know I got some feedback from some people, a couple of people, when a couple of Sunday nights ago, when we introduced the new song, and I said, if you don't believe the same power lives in us, don't sing it. If you don't believe Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, don't sing it. Because this is how God feels about that. God's not saying, I'm not on to you because you're worshiping incorrectly. I'm on to you because you're just sounds coming out of your mouth. You're just coming and checking in. God tells these people that there's an expectation to not just do the right thing, but to do what? For the right reasons. Do it the right way. Now, that doesn't mean, that's why I pointed out who Asaph is. Asaph is the leader of the musicians. As we'll see in Psalm 81, God specifically calls out some musicians, says, hey, this is your job. Your job is to play the tambourine and the lyre. Do it. The rest of you come in here and sing. Your job is to do this other thing. Do it. Your job is to blow the horn. Do it. They had their specific jobs they were supposed to do. But even when it's a specific job, you're supposed to do it right. You're supposed to do it with the right attitude and with the right heart. God gets down to the end of this here. See, I almost said that. People are focusing on the act of sacrifices, but their lives are not reflecting this. Tommy just said it better. But it's interesting to see God focus on their worship. And the fact that it's not about them worshiping idols. Because that's usually what we see, is God says you've gone off and you've adulterated? You've committed adultery with idols, whatever the word would be there. Because they go off after worship or after idols and they worship idols, and God says you can't do that. Here he's not even saying that. He's saying you're doing the feast. I don't need your bulls, but yeah, that's the thing. You're supposed to do that. But he's saying do it the right way. Do it with your hearts, or this causes me the lament. This causes God to be in a position of disorientation, where he's like, I'm not happy with this. And you people need to fix this. Then also you can look through there and never mind the worship part, because again, go back to the idea of the conduct. God says you see a thief, you make friends with him. You hang out with the adulterers. What's he saying there? Nobody wants to say it. They're just like them. Yeah, our thing, here's what we say. Well, I've got to be around these people because I'm trying to win them to Jesus. I've got to hang out with my friends who are, bad people and do wrong things and talk this way or whatever because I'm trying to win. Okay, if that's really what you're doing, do it. Okay, let's understand that. But often it is, I'm going to hang around them because I want to be just like them because they're the people I want to hang out with them. So I kind of adapt to be just like them. That's what God's saying here. You see a thief and you make friends with him. You don't say, hey, dude, you're a thief. You got to quit stealing from people. You see an adulterer and you just kind of blend in with them. You don't say, hey, stop doing that. God is talking about this whole idea. Again, there's the problems with their heart not being in worship, but their heart's not in their lives. He's saying, you're living just like everybody else, and then you come and you act like you have these days where you say you're my people. Well, go be my people then. I mean, that, like I said, that is a universal challenge. That call to God's people never changes because we tend to do that. We don't want to stand out. And that's what God's calling them to do, to separate themselves from the world around them. And then when God says in verse, 21, you've done all these things and I kept silent. And he said, you thought I was just like you. What's God saying there?
You brought up so many great points. This stuff leaps off the page to me. Like you reference this in the 21st century. And we keep saying that these are God's people. That's us today. We're
Right.
God's people.
Yeah.
And so when you just made that statement, I think of the word thought. That is me taking God and putting him in my standards and my values, as opposed to us going to what God said.
Yeah. God says, you thought I was just like you. Now, think about this. Adam mentioned, somebody mentioned the idea of idols. What did the people around them do with their idols? Or with their gods? Man, that's not the right way to ask this. Think about the Greek gods. You know anything about the Greek Roman gods? How did they behave? Like petulant children a lot. But that made it easy to relate to your gods. Well, Hermes acts this way, and Ares, he gets angry about everything, wanting to fight everybody all the time. That's why I'm that way, because I'm a follower of Ares. It was easy to put human traits on false idols, because then it made it easier to say, well, I'm still following the gods. I just have the same sort of attitudes that they have. God says, do not do that with me. Do not turn me into one of your wooden idols that you carved out of a tree that I created. Don't turn me into one of those. And man, okay, trying to not get on the horse here. We do that so often today. We make God in our image. We make God what we want him to be. Well, God's loving and merciful, so he's not gonna condemn this or that, because that's how. Well, ask him. I mean, look at what he says, and that's what God's reminding them here. Don't make me like you. I'm so far above who you are. Yes, I mean, we can't take this whole psalm out of context, and as in God sounds just angry, and that's how he sounds here. But even at the end of this, he says, whoever sacrifices a thank offering honors me, and whoever orders his conduct, I will show him the salvation of God. He says there's a way I won't be an angry God. That you live the right way. You do what you're supposed to do. We have seen all of these. Oh, there's the idols. We've seen all these psalms so far from the perspective of us. That's why I decided to not skip this, because we need to see God's voice in this. That God has an opinion. I mean, and not even an opinion. God has the standard of how it's supposed to be. And we even today, living under a covenant of grace and mercy and love, cannot forget that. That God still has a standard that He expects His people to live up to. Yes, there's grace. Yes, there's mercy. But the thing we forget is there was also grace and mercy under the old covenant. But there was just a different set of standards. So when God says this, verse 22, understand this, you who forget God, or I will tear you apart. That's one of those things that you, as a Jewish person, hearing this psalm written, knowing that these are the words of God, would have to just make your stomach melt.
That kind of reminds me, like, why the book of Leviticus? Like, why are all these stipulations? Ultimately, like, represent world. You're going to be under my covenant.
Yeah.
Look like me, and that's what I got from that verse where he says, "Want to make me like you." Or you think every time we represent God, there's too often we'll, kind of sugarcoat things.
Right.
Want to offend, and it's like, but that's not who God is. God is saying, "This is my standard, keep or don't." And we have to have that same one. And it's hard sometimes to still want to be the person that does that.
Yeah.
Got to represent them properly and accurately.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Nathan brings up Leviticus, where Leviticus shows the absolute holiness of God. And then Leviticus says, be holy as I'm holy. You know where that's also found? In our covenant, in the New Testament. That when we look at the holiness of God, as he says here, I'm not upset about the fact that you're offering the sacrifices, because that's what I've told you to do. But you need to do it in a holy way. You need to do it in a way that you're understanding who you are and who God is. And God says, if you don't remember that, I'll tear you apart. Cheryl.
One thing that I keep hearing is this, and it's to us as well as it is to them. They've just gotten indifferent. They worship a lot.
Oh, yeah.
But their heart is the attitude. And that's such a lesson for all of us.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if you didn't hear what Cheryl said, it isn't that these people aren't worshiping, because they worship a lot. They're I mean, that's their culture. They're in a theocracy. They're reminded all the time that God is the ruler of everything. But they've gotten numb to it, it seems like. And then within that also their conduct has gotten to where they're more interested in looking like the people around them than they are about being God's holy people.
God reminds them that these sacrifices are not for His benefit.
Yeah.
I don't need your sacrifice.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a great point too, is that that's one of those things that we see throughout, even as we go further into history, into the prophets, where God's like, your sacrifices detest me, but He reminds us, I don't need this. He goes, I mean, He even says in this psalm, everything's mine anyway. If I wanted to kill a bunch of cows, I'd do it like that. That's not the point. This is for you to remember who I am. As we have looked through these other disorientation psalms, they usually end, the term I use, the deep breath moment. What's interesting here is that God seems to even have His. Because He's gone on and He said, this is what's going to happen. I'll tear you apart and there'll be no one to rescue you. But whoever sacrifices a thank offering honors me, and whoever orders his conduct, I will show him the salvation of God. God even ends on a positive note. I mean, there's so much, I don't know, there's so much of that structure that I think we can take from the how we deal with things. I mean, you kind of merge how Paul deals with, Paul, when he writes letters, he says, I love you people. I'm praying about you all the time here. You're so great. I'm so happy for you. But here's a little problem we need to deal with. But then he usually ends with, greet these people. I hope to see you soon. Except Galatians, he just jumps in and rips them apart. But here's this is how God does it. God says there's some things we need to fix, but then He says, but the person who comes to me my way and orders their conduct, as it says, does what they're supposed to do, it's salvation. So there's the silver lining in all this. Okay, any thoughts on Psalm 50? And then we'll switch over to Psalm 81. Any other thoughts?
This might be a little meta, but it's another good reminder that the Psalms are also like prophecy, right? Like they're taking on the voice of God. I was in 1 Chronicles mentions the sons of Asaph. But it says, David and the chiefs of the service also set apart, this is 1 Chronicles 25:1, for the service the sons of Asaph and of Heman and of the Jeduthun, who prophesied with lyres, with harps, and with cymbals.
Yeah.
So the scripture calls that out as well. This is also prophecy.
Yeah, this is also sharing a message God wants you to hear. Yeah, even in their presentation of worship. So Psalm 50 has a negative feel to it, but then it ends on a positive note. Psalm 81 is going to be very quick. This is a quote from John Greenleaf Whittier. For of all sad words of tongue or pen, the saddest are these, it might have been. That's what Psalm 81's about. That's the feel that I get from Psalm 81, because God says, here's how our relationship should be. Here's how things should work for us. The first 5 verses of Psalm 81 are a call to celebrate. He says, okay, and here's where you see those different layers of the people who are being called to lead or to be a part of worship. Verse 1, sing for joy to God our strength. That's to just everybody. Shout in triumph to the God of Israel. Lift up a song. Play the tambourine, the melodious lyre, and the harp. There's a group of priests. That was their job. This isn't just a shout out to everybody. Everybody grab something, because then it'd just be chaos. It'd be horrible. But then he says, play the tambourine, the melodious lyre, and the harp. Blow the horn on the day of the feast. There's also a specific group of priests who are the horn blowers. Now, when you hear horn in this context, don't think like, Louis Armstrong, or, this is not a trumpet or a trombone or something. This is a shofar, the Jewish horn that is the call to battle. So when he says blow the horn, he's not talking woodwinds and brass. That's not what he's saying. He's saying this is a call to attention. This is say, listen, there's some things I need to tell you about this. Come together in a posture, a presentation of worship, but be ready to listen. Then in verse 5, what are we doing here? A call to celebrate, blah, 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 Feast of the Tabernacles. Yeah, that's not supposed to be there. Oh yeah, then the middle section, God does what he does very often. He reminds them of what he's done for them. I mean, how many times, Old Testament, New Testament, do you see the reminder that I'm the God who delivered you what? Out of Egypt. Because that was so incredibly significant that God reminds him of that. I mean, we even see that, Stephen goes through that before he's killed in the New Testament. He goes through the whole history of Israel because that mattered so much. God's reminding his people about how dependent they are on him. Then the rest of it, he's talking about Israel. Let me just get to the end here. Look at verses 14 through 16. I would quickly subdue their enemies and turn my hand against their foes. Those who hate the Lord would cower to him. Their doom would last forever. But he would feed Israel and with the best wheat. I would satisfy you with honey from the rock. Look up back at verse 11. But my people did not listen to my voice. Israel did not obey me. So I gave them over to their stubborn hearts. I should have started there. He says, I was going to give you everything. I mean, you can go back to the beginning. I mean, when God promises Abram, I'll give you a land, I'll give you a nation. When it's time to go take that land, we know what happens there. The people freak out and they panic because the people are big and scary. They say, we can't do this. And you've got Moses, Joshua, and Caleb who are like, this is our land. That's another time where God says, I was going to give you, this is yours. I've called it your land forever. You just got to walk in and get it. Yes, you're going to have to fight. You're going to have to take on the enemies there. But it's yours. This is a reminder of that, oh man, I had some really good stuff here. It's that remind, and read through this psalm on your time. I didn't mean to spend so much time on Psalm 50, but Psalm 81, read through this. This is a reminder, in my opinion, you might disagree, but this is a reminder for us that God tells us, even as New Testament Christians today, look at all the blessings I'll give you. Now, God, I mean, we know this. God never promises a perfect life. God never promises everything's going to be, peaches and cream all the time. But God says, look how I can bless you. Just don't walk away from me. Just don't turn your back on me. I got to find this one quote because it's really good. It's not mine, but... Okay, here it is. The psalmist says here, the way to avoid a wasted life is to walk in obedience with God. And then he says this also. Something along the lines of, we may make our decision to go our own way and we think things will be better for us. They won't be better, but we're still going to pay the fare to get to that distant place. And when we see that all through Scripture, God reminds even His people who are His people, that's, again, point out, that's us today. Those of us who are Christians, that's us. That even people who are His people can drift away if they don't stay focused. Okay? So next week, I promise, we'll get into the reorientation Psalms, and we'll all be happier. No, it won't. Any other thoughts? Okay, thanks very much.